Welcome to Rebel Speak and Isaiah Meandering. And today we are in chapter 48 and kind of this long conversation. God speaking through Isaiah regarding Cyrus and God moving the children of Israel out of Babylon and back home. And that they haven't seen this coming. They've been discouraged and kind of lost the storyline. And one of the things I want to say up front about the nature of grace, that in the book of Isaiah, we see God struggling with God's own grace. And there's something about grace where grace can do such good things. But on the other hand, as many of us know, grace can actually embolden sin. As parents or situations where you're kind of that expression caught between a rock and a hard place. There's nowhere to turn. And God's been dealing with a people that God is completely committed to. Completely. God, part of the bizarreness of the Old Testament is the depth of God's commitment. If God just walked away, it'd be no big deal. But God doesn't walk away. God hangs in there and God prevails. God prevails. And I want to say God prevails at a great heartache to God. You know that expression, like, I just don't need this, and you walk away. I think that's partially there for God, and yet God's such a big, it's not there at all for God. Big vision, not there at all. But today we're going to this is a last, and then we're going to move into a new dialogue. And another thing I want to say that I've said before is that in Isaiah, in the prophets, that we can get to this point, and I feel today is kind of that where, okay, this redundancy, I'm not going to really hear it, because it just seems the economy of language. So we even more so, like anyone under 30, really economic, right? Language is really economic. Writers are succinct, sentences are full, statements are made clearly. You don't go on and on. But in the poetry of Isaiah's day, that God's giving lots of time to God's frustration with the people, to God's faithfulness, to the fact that there is no other God but God. And this can kind of get lost in the kind of, I want to just kind of do like a spiral. It's kind of how modern math is being taught. We're going to go around it this way, then this way, and get tighter and tighter. But there's a way that God's just kind of, in the redundancy is the exclamation. In the redundancy is the strength of the argument. That's where the strength of the argument lies, in the redundancy, in the pattern of a redundancy. And it's as if God's obsessed with getting this through to a very deaf people. And so we're going to see terms and concepts we've seen before. But I want you to do your best to hear God's faithfulness in the midst of it, to hear God's love, to hear God's the chosenness, the reality of Israel's chosenness, God's faithfulness to that reality, and all the more so on the side of the cross that you and I live. All the more so. We'll see a bit later, even where, I'm kind of, there's a point where God just says, I'm not even angry at you anymore. I'm not even wanting to work in that kind of terrain of anger anymore. There's something that's getting kind of birthed through this process where God moves forward in relationship. There's different moments in scripture where God moves forward in new ways of relating to humanity. Moves forward, kind of at the flood, God moves forward, says, I'm never going to relate that way to humanity again. And there's something in the book of Isaiah, we're going to see this moving forward. I was very angry, but I'm not going to be angry that way again. And then in the cross, there's this massive shift of all that Jesus brings to us through the Spirit, and all that he brings us into through the Spirit. All that the work of the cross does for intimacy and the defining, the relational defining of intimacy. Listen to me, O family of Jacob, who are called by the name of Israel and born into the family of Judah. Okay, God's getting very specific. Listen to me, O family of Jacob. That's where it started. Jacob becomes Israel, who are called by the name of Israel and born into the family of Judah, that southern tribe. I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to you, to the ones that were exiled. I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to you in intimacy, in history, relationally. I'm speaking to you. I know you. I know you in ways that you don't know yourself. I know you in your rebellion in ways that you don't even know yourself. Listen, you who take oaths in the name of Yahweh and call on the God of Israel. You swear by my name. You swear by my name. I swear by Yahweh. You call, even in bad times, you call on my name. You call on the God of Israel when you need me, when you need me. You don't follow through on any of your promises. Okay, I don't know if you have ever had a season like that in your life where you were kind of, God, if you do this for me, I'm gonna do that for you. And God's like, you've done that so many times. And those promises you've made, you've never maintained. You've never been faithful to them. Even though you call yourselves the holy city and talk about depending on the God of Israel, there's a way inside your mind, your life, that you identify with me, whose name is Yahweh Almighty. So there's, I shouldn't interrupt myself that way. Even though you call yourself the holy city, you reference yourself in light of me and talk about depending on the God of Israel's whose name is Yahweh Almighty. Time and again, I warned you about what was going to happen in the future. Then suddenly I took action and all my predictions came true. God really is saying here again, I'm going to use the word capricious because so many gods of the land are so many little g gods. People imagine gods with power as being capricious. And our God, Yahweh, is the only God with real power, and God's not capricious. And God's reminding them, no, you're where you are. And if you don't look at the consequences of where you are honestly and faithfully historically, then you're going to come to conclusions about me, Yahweh, that aren't true. They're not true. Suddenly, I took action, and all my predictions, I spoke, I warned, I sent prophets, I did all that I could. And then when I acted, then suddenly I took action, and all my predictions came true. I acted. I warned. There's inveigled. There's a word there I want, but I warned. I kind of nearly begged. I shouted. I was intensely involved trying to get your attention, telling you I'm going to act. If you can't hear, I'm going to act. And then I acted. God's going to say more. I know how stubborn and obstinate you are. Stubborn, okay? Obstinate. Like an obstinate person, they're just not going to, no matter what happens, they're not going to let go of their bad thinking. When you're obstinate, there's just this, it doesn't matter. You're determined in a way that's not wise. The hardness of heart in you is beyond reasoning. It's not learning from that situation it's in. Your necks are as unbending as iron. And that neck is that idea of movement and wisdom and how okay, I see it different. I'm going to look from a different angle. Over here, I'm going to see it, right? I'm over here, I'm going to see it. No, you're not seeing it from any new element. You're not moving your mind. You're not moving your head. You're not moving your thinking. That's this neck. Nope, you are as hard-headed as bronze. Now, see, God's going to say here, because I knew that about you, I know your obstinance. That is why I told you ahead of time what I was going to do. I spoke through the prophets ahead of time. That way you could never say, my idols did it, because you worship in idols. You're calling on idols all the time. And I had to step out there and proclaim from the way back in the book of Isaiah about Cyrus and Persia and Babylon coming to an end. I had to do that because otherwise here you are in the land of Babylon worshiping these little g gods in the form and shape of idols. And then were I to move, were you to find freedom, in that moment, the glory would go to those, not to me. This is part of your obstinance, the refusal to see me moving on your behalf. The quickness to accredit right? The quickness to accredit the goodness of God to other situations, circumstances, and things. The quickness. The other day I was just driving and I was thinking, isn't it interesting that when Darwin came up with the idea of evolution, he felt it was necessary to preclude any reasoning behind it. That it necessarily is random. It's necessarily, like there he is somewhere in the, I think, late 1800s, I don't know. And part of his thinking is the necessity, I guess I'll put it that way, of randomness. That God could not be a part of it. God had to be precluded. Why? Why? So that this desire to give credit elsewhere is just deep in the storyline, and God knows it. So he's like, I told you ahead of time what I was going to do. This way you could never say my idols did it. My wooden image and metal God commanded it to happen. I told you this long ago so that you wouldn't be worshiping the wrong things when I myself moved on your behalf. You wouldn't give credit wrongly. You have heard my predictions and seen them fulfilled, but you refuse to admit it. This is that hard-heartedness, that it's more fun to give credit elsewhere. I don't know. Now I will tell you new things I have not mentioned before. I've always loved this this is something that I've just, I don't know, I've liked this. I told you so you wouldn't give glory to another, but now I'm coming up with plans that I have not mentioned before, secrets you have not heard. They are brand new, not things from the past, so you cannot say, we knew that all the time. There's a way that God is just frustrated if he does and frustrated if he doesn't, right? It's frustrating. Human sin and rebellion, the narratives that we come up with, they're frustrating for God. God looks out at the world and he sees all its beauty and he sees all its goodness and he sees all the love that's been spoken at creation, and he feels like, wow, that's enough. That's enough. But nope. No, we find a way to worship else, to fall in love with the creation itself and not the creator. So he says, okay, I'm going to do something new now, something that you weren't planning on. So you cannot say we knew it all the time, right? We're going to give credit to the wrong thing, or we're just going to be cocky and like, I always knew that. Yes, I will tell you of things that are entirely new. I love this. I just love it. I just love the language of Scripture. For I know so well what traitors you are. You'll betray me in a minute. It is your delight, Israel, to betray me. And God's still with them. God's still loving them. God's still leading them forward in compassion and passion. You have been rebels from your earliest childhood. God sought them out, found them, and very quickly they were rebels. Rotten through and through. Okay, this is God just laying it, I don't know what's that expression, laying it on the table. Like, now here's the fact. If it weren't for me, this relationship wouldn't even be. It wouldn't even be. There's no faithfulness. There's no loyalty. You are rotten through and through. Yet, here's God, for my own sake and for the honor of my name. See, there was a time when God was so done with the people after he led them out of the promised land. He's like, I'm just going to let them die in the desert. I can embellish memories, but it seems like that was something. And he's like, Moses, it's just going to be you and me. And Moses is like, God, it can't just be you and me. That will look so bad. It will look to everybody else like this God that tried to save a people couldn't. So God's up against that storyline, right? He's up against like, can I save this people? What do I do with real people with real hearts that make real decisions? And they're stubborn and rebellious. What do I, God, do? Do I abandon them and say, I failed? Or do I see the storyline through? And you and I know how far the storyline's going to go. God's going to enter in even more deeply in the person of Jesus Christ, even more vulnerably in the person of Jesus Christ. But here we are in Isaiah, and God says this, no, I am not going to, yet for my own sake, I'm faithful to you for my name. I'm faithful for you because I don't want to be the the God that couldn't redeem the people that God loved. Okay, yet for my own sake and for the honor of my name, I will hold back my anger and not wipe you out. I have refined you, but not in the way of silver is not in the way that silver is refined. And if you listen to me at all, you know that this verse is dear to me because God has given it to me, 48:10, Isaiah 48:10, many times in my life. Rebecca, I'm not destroying you. Silver, it goes in, and all that's not silver comes out, and a fraction of what once was is there. I'm not refining you as gold. I have refined you, but not in the way silver is refined. Rather, I have refined you in the furnace of suffering. It's there that in those moments where we call on God's name and he salvifically, Savior, salvation, walks into the story and we find that we're not alone. And whatever's broken in that, there's something in those moments where God shows up, and I need God and he shows up. And that's true throughout my childhood. Throughout my childhood. Situations that were so beyond me. Dyslexic, you can just make incredible mistakes, slow. My video was full, so I'm going to pick up. I was just talking about where in my life, in my childhood, God's met me in moments that I needed salvation, and God's shown up. And God is not he's not refining us to get rid of us. He's refining us that in those moments of suffering and anxiety, we find salvation, we find grace, we get to know the goodness of God, the love and the mercy and the endurance. I have refined you in the furnace of suffering. And then he says this, I will rescue you for my sake. Yes, for my own sake. God's like, I'm in this. I'm in it to win it. I'm in it to win it with you. And you're going to see something. That way, the pagan nations will not be able to claim that their gods have conquered me. It's, Yahweh against Marduk. Like, no way. I will not let them have my glory. You are my glory. You are my story. You are my glory. God is committed to salvation for all of creation. Creation is destined for salvation because of the faithfulness of God. That's why we don't want to take the storyline of salvation upon our own shoulders. In the end, Christ came and died for us. The storyline of salvation is not me being perfect. That wouldn't go very far. The storyline of salvation is that God so loved the world that he gave Jesus Christ, that whoever believes in him will not perish. And there's lots of ways to think about perishing. Won't be lost in their own failures, their own misery. Won't be worshiping gods that can't save. Won't be responding to childhood trauma through self-righteousness. I've been watching some videos on that, just how it's very easy to respond to trauma by trying to be perfect, and then we just get triggered all the time because we can't be. Or we can also just give up and fail. And all that beauty that God intentionally created and put in your life, right? The way that God's chosen you to be, right? To be made in God's reflection, to express God uniquely on the face of this earth. When you surrender and give up and move into purposelessness, well, I know God is seeking you out. I know God loves you greatly. I know that God doesn't just surrender on creation. But I also know that there's a way that God, like the Son, when the Father, there's a story of God leaving 99 to find the 100th sheep when it was lost. And there's another story of the time when the Father lets the Son go out and waits, anticipatorily, waiting. As soon as he sees him, he runs out to him, but lets the Son go. And those are just two striking contrasts of how God handles and responds to us when we're lost. There's the story of Jesus, the image, not story, of Jesus knocking at our door, hoping we'll open up, let him in. All right, let's see. I will rescue you for my sake, yes, for my own sake. That way the pagan nations will not be able to claim that their gods have conquered me. I will not let them have my glory. Listen to me, O family of Jacob, Israel, my chosen one. I alone am God, the first and the last. It was my hand that laid the foundations of the earth. The palm of my right hand spread out the heavens above. I spoke and they came into being. There's just, for God, this is everything. These gods they've not created a thing in their darn existence. They're nothing gods. I am He, the first and the last. All that you see, all that you know, every ounce, moment of experience that is this thing called life is because I am. Have any of your idols told you this? Come, all of you, and listen. The Lord has chosen Cyrus as his ally. He will use him to put an end to the empire of Babylon, destroying the Babylonian armies. I have said it. I'm calling Cyrus. I will send him on this errand, and will help him succeed. Come closer and listen. I have always told you plainly what would happen, so you would have no trouble understanding. I've spoken plainly to you always. And now the sovereign Yahweh, sovereign, what a wonderful word, the one who's over and above all things, and his spirit has sent me. So we see Isaiah for a minute. And now the sovereign Yahweh and his spirit have sent me with this message. Yahweh, your Redeemer. We talked about all that means. The one that will pay the price to save you. The Holy One of Israel says, I am Yahweh, your God, who teaches you what is good and leads you along the paths you should follow. Wonderful Bible verse. Oh, that you had listened to my commands, then you would have had peace flow. This was never God's intention, what they've been through. Had you listened from the get-go, you would have had peace flowing like a gentle river and righteousness rolling like waves. We've heard that before. Righteousness, right? Is that Amos? Righteousness rolling like waves. There was meant to be an abundance of goodness. And then you would have become as numerous as sand along the seashore, too many to count. They've seen a lot of death, a lot of loss of life, a lot of diminishing. There would have been no need for your destruction. Had you listened when I spoke. Oh, and it's like God saying, I so wish you had. I so wish it had gone that way, but I can't do anything about it. I can't. I can only go forward. I can only keep moving forward, right? Keep moving forward. I can only keep renewing my plan and my determination for you to know my love, for you to be the people of my pasture. Yet even now, be free from your captivity. Even though it went this way, be free now. Move forward in your freedom. Leave Babylon and the Babylonians, singing as you go. I've worked out a great plan on your behalf. It might have been costly. It might have been difficult. There's a part of my heart that so wishes it hadn't gone this way, but here's the fact. Leave and sing as you go. Shout to the ends of the earth that Yahweh has redeemed his servants. I've moved on your behalf. You're not just stuck in the storyline that all the rest of history is stuck in. No other people, when they're under oppression, have a God that walks in and changes the story and saves them. You know, you might be saying, where's our God? But here's the fact. You alone have a God that can move and bring old Babylon down. You alone have a God that at your behest moves in and says, no, shout with joy. I'm walking into the storyline. I'm changing it. You're not alone. You're not abandoned. Your God is with you. Shout to the ends of the earth that Yahweh has redeemed his servants, the people of Israel. They were not thirsty when he led them through the desert. This is that return. This is this contrast a little bit with it, moving them out of, it's an echo of what happened when they were brought out of Egypt, right? And the oppression of Egypt. And now there's this echo of them being brought out. You before, as a people, knew a time when you were not thirsty in the desert. And there he, Yahweh, divided the rock and water gushed out for them to drink. This is this echo. The God who acted as the God who's acting. The God who's been faithful all along. But here's this one concluding remark. But there is no peace for the wicked, says Yahweh. And that's what made me think of that thing that I began with. Grace is a funny thing. Because grace can just embolden the wicked. And God's saying, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not this mat that you can wipe your feet on and swear by me when it's convenient for you and make sacrifices when you want something from me and think I'll show up. I'm never doing that again. I've got your hearts where I want your hearts to be. I'm speaking to your hearts. I'm speaking from my heart to your hearts. I'm showing you that there is a God, no other God like me. I'm real. You're going to see me in real time, do real things in your life. But I tell you this, there is no peace for the wicked. I will never again be the God that you think you can manipulate and you don't give a hoot about. You function with no respect for me. I won't know that again. All right. That's our concluding remark here in Isaiah Meandering. And I wish you a blessed day. God bless you.